Well, what about UFOs and aliens? We get those kind of questions all the time, and you really can't deny the fact that space aliens are extremely popular. You see them in popular culture, you see them in movies and TVs, all this sort of stuff. And I want to share with you a little cartoon here. It's Garfield from a month or two ago. His girlfriend Arlene there, and she says, "Where have you been? I was worried about you." And Garfield says, "I was abducted by aliens." Her eyes pop open. She says, "Really?" And he says, "Now I'm worried about you." All right, so aliens are all over the place, and people find it easy to believe in these sorts of things. To illustrate this, how popular they are, I'm going to put up a bunch of photographs from various TV shows and movies over the years featuring aliens.
No.
Pay careful attention and see how many of these you know.
Because I'll probably recognize a lot of them.
How many of these will you recognize? Okay, you ready?
Maybe. Yeah. No. Okay, get all of them.
Did anybody get all of them?
No. There's
Okay.
a couple I would
Most
say.
of them? Usually when I'm giving this in a large crowd, we've got a small group today, I get in front of a large crowd, I'll get 2 or 3 hands that go up, and I then will congratulate them. You are a sci-fi nerd. Right? With a small group, it's likely to see, some of those are older than me, all right? So I have to go way back on some of those. But you did recognize many of them, right? Most of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Some of them were pretty easy, others were pretty hard. Before I get started, though, let's define some terms, because it's very important to get the terms right. One term is ET, that's short for extraterrestrial. And by the way, that is a precise term. That is a technical term, and it stands for extraterrestrial, but more colloquially would be called a space alien, or LGM. Anybody know what LGM stands for? Little Green Men.
Oh.
All right. Make sure you know. I didn't make that up. Somebody else did. Now, this is not a technical term. The term is flying saucer. Presumably, a flying saucer is a spaceship flown by LGM. All right, ETs fly around in space, flying saucers. Now, this next term is technical. It is a UFO. It stands for unidentified flying object. How many of you have seen an unidentified flying object, a UFO? Every hand should be up. All right. Why is that? Well, let's think about it. People think. They think when you say UFO, I mean flying saucer. No, I'm not saying that at all. What does it mean? It means unidentified flying object. So if you see an object in the sky, presumably flying, and you don't know what it is, then it's an unidentified flying object. How many of you have seen a UFO? Every hand goes up here, and every hand people watching should symbolically at least go up. There's nothing wrong with seeing a UFO. I've seen many UFOs in my time. However, there's another technical term here, and it is less known, very little known, but actually is a technical term, an IFO, and that simply means identified flying objects. Once you identify what it is, then you you've converted it from a UFO to an IFO, have you not? So when a person sees a UFO and they say it's a flying saucer, it's not a UFO anymore, is it? Can't be. If you've identified as a flying saucer, it's an IFO now. I think it's a MIFO, misidentified flying object, but you have identified it. Now, a couple of notes here. And I've been showing you pictures of flying saucers. That's my favorite. I love that. It's not piloted by an LGM. It's just an LK, a little kid. All right. And so, a couple of notes. First of all, UFO and flying saucer are not the same thing. I think somebody asked me this morning about. I was going to talk about UFOs, and somebody followed it up, and I said no, and then he picked up on it because people confuse the two. Many times people use the word UFO when they clearly mean flying saucer. For instance, there's a certain late-night radio talk show. I won't tell you the name of the show, but it is heard coast to coast. And if you ever, and so if you ever listen to this show and they get onto this subject, sometimes we'll hear the host. It took them a moment, didn't it? If you listen to the host talking to a guest, or the guest speaking up, or callers come in, they frequently will use the term UFO when they very clearly mean flying saucer. And I think the reason why they do that is because they think if they say flying saucer, people will think, "Woo, you're weird, you're crazy, cuckoo." But if you say UFO, it sounds very technical jargon. So many people, UFO and flying saucer are the same thing. No, they're not. If it's a flying saucer, you know it's a flying, or you think it's a flying saucer, it can't possibly be a UFO. And your primary goal, whenever you see a UFO, is to make it an IFO, convert it into that. And you know, I've given this talk a number of times, and every time I do, I've given the talk, I would say to the people, I am batting 1,000. I have never walked away from a UFO. And not because I ran away either. It's because I've always identified what they were. I always converted my UFOs to an IFO, and I've been saying that for years. I can't say that anymore. Because last Saturday night, I'm dead serious, I saw an object in the sky. I don't know what it was. It was in the sky, moving across the sky, and it baffled me. Still, I don't know what it is. If I could find somebody else who saw it, maybe I could know, but I have no idea what it was. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a flying saucer, but I don't know what it is. So I'm only batting like 99.9 now, I guess. You know, I haven't been able to explain. That's just kind of sad. Maybe the Lord's putting me in my place, you know. Okay, here you go. You can't be bragging to people you always convert them, because I can't convert them all now. Well, when did this whole interest in UFOs and flying saucers and aliens get started? You know what? People have always seen odd things in the sky they couldn't explain. We have records from the Middle Ages, for instance, of weird things in the sky. But people didn't think of them in terms of being space aliens and flying saucers. This all had to begin at some point. We can just about date this to an event in the summer of 1947. No, not that event. It's a different event I'm talking about. This happened on June 24th, and it was in the state of Washington. There was a man named Kenneth Arnold. He was a businessman. And he also had a pilot's license, and part of his business, he flew a small plane. He left the Seattle-Tacoma Airport, I believe, and was on his way to, I think, Yakima, I believe, a couple hours flight, I guess. And as he flew past Mount Rainier, he reported seeing 9 shiny objects, and they were moving. And he tried to estimate how fast that they were moving. He saw these objects moving along like this, and so from their speed that he could see the angular change in position, he could estimate their speed by estimating how far away they are. Now, if these objects are inside the cockpit or just outside the cockpit, like reflections or something, they're not moving very fast at all. But if they're 10 miles away, they are moving really fast. At the time, he thought he was seeing something moving maybe close to twice the speed of sound. Now, he was a technologically savvy man, being a pilot and such, and he kept up on things, and he knew that we were soon to break the sound barrier. Hadn't been done yet. Chuck Yeager a few months later would do it for the first time. But what he thought he was seeing was a squadron of experimental but very secret military aircraft flying at faster than the speed of sound. That's what he thought he saw at the time. Of course, the military denied this, which in the estimation of some people proves that's what it was. When it comes down to UFO stuff, people are like that. You know, if the government denies it, that proves that it actually what it was. Never mind. And he identified them as flying objects, and he described their motion like saucers skipping on water. What I think I meant by this, if you take a round, flat, smooth stone and you throw it, and I have to kind of lean over when I do it, you throw it with some spin, it hits the water, and it kind of hovers, doesn't it? Kind of a cool-looking motion, and that's what he's getting across. These things are kind of hovering as they went. So notice he was describing, the word saucer appeared, and by the way, you should never do that with your mother's saucers. I should have killed him. But there's always a stone. I have more sense than that. But he used the term saucer not to describe what they look like, but to describe their motion. And he used the word flying not to describe what they look like, but to describe the object. So he used the words flying and saucer in 2 different contexts. And so he didn't use the term flying saucer. That came a couple days later in the Chicago Sun newspaper when they reported the incident, and it became flying saucer. We think the term was coined then. For a while, people were calling them flying discs at that point. By the way, when he landed an hour or so later in Yakima, he asked for the director of the airport so he could tell him, report what he saw. Word got around quickly, so other people came to the office. He told the story repeatedly that day and the next few days to reporters. Everybody had listened again and again and again and again. Well, this got picked up by the news services, and very quickly hundreds of reports quickly followed. It was as if the United States and maybe the Earth were under the attack of an armada of alien spacecraft. In fact, about this time, there was another thing that happened, or a non-event actually, but happened in a little town I'm sure you never heard of, a little place in eastern New Mexico called Roswell. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I thought you had heard of the place. There were some ranchers that had been out sometime there in middle to late June out on the range, and they came in after they'd been out for days, and they were away from everything, and they got into town trying to catch up what had been going on, and they heard this, saw in the newspaper there had been this flying disc seen in Washington, and they said, well, you know, a few days ago, last week, I don't know what day it was now, but we ran across some debris in the middle of nowhere, some plastic and paper and wire and wood. I think that might be one of those flying discs that crashed, and this thing kind of blew up. The nearby Air Corps base came out, and they confiscated all the debris, and they just reported that it was a crashed weather balloon. And they're set for 30 years. See, the Roswell incident didn't happen in 1947. It happened in the late 70s when somebody went back and tried to dig all this up and redo the whole thing. So it really goes back about 40 years maybe, not 70 years in this case. By the way, was there a government cover-up in Roswell in 1947? There was. But it's not the cover-up you think it was. You can check out other resources later to see that. Okay, why the rash of UFO reports now? Why is that? Well, I think there's the power of suggestion. Back summer of '75, there was a big blockbuster movie that came out that summer, one of the first big summer blockbusters. It had Richard Dreyfuss in it. The guy that people say looks a lot like me. Anybody know what movie that was?
Close Encounters.
No, that was 1977. Gonna need a bigger boat.
Officer Jim? No?
Jaws.
Oh, Jaws.
Jaws, yes!
Was
And people went to the theater and just got the living ends scared out of them. It was incredible. And there were thousands, tens, maybe millions of shark sightings. I understand that summer some beach communities saw a downturn in attendance because people apparently felt relatively safer going to the beach, going to the mountains than going to the beach. I say relatively safer because it was not restricted just to the beach. The town I was living in is about 140 miles inland, maybe more. There's a little river that runs through the town. I've waded in it many times. I don't think there's any place that would be above my knees. There's a waterfall you have to go up to get to the downtown in it. There were reports of sharks, great white sharks, in that little river. Even better, up farther northern part of the county is the Eastern Continental Divide off the Blue Ridge, and they have some reservoirs at the state park up there. The water comes off impounded by a dam, and there were reports of sharks in that. How in the world they got in freshwater lake is beyond me. You know, people see sticks, they see boots, tires, catfish, minnows, who knows what they're seeing, and they just went crazy with interpretation because, well, that summer people saw sharks in the water, and that's just what everybody saw. It led to a big frenzy, didn't it? Also, it helps to have the plurality of worlds out there. What do I mean by plurality of worlds? Well, we live in a world where people live here, and the plurality of worlds is the belief there are other worlds, other planets out there like the Earth with beings like us on them. But you know, for much of history, that was inconceivable. Why? Well, because much of history, people thought the Earth was the center of everything. And if we're at the center, can any other world be at the center? No. So by definition, we are the center, we are it, there's nothing else. But you know, 400 years ago, people began to realize that the Earth was just one of several planets orbiting around the sun. And maybe some of those other planets might be inhabited like our world. There's a plurality between us, or similarity between them, possibly. And then shortly thereafter, people begin to figure out that the sun was a star, and the reason why the stars at night are so faint, they're very far away, just as the sun has planets orbiting it, maybe some of these stars have planets orbiting them. And maybe they harbor life. And this took off in the 17th and 18th century big time. In fact, in the 1750s, a man named John Adams, who later would grow up to, he was young then, but became eventually the second president of the United States, he wrote in the 1750s in his journal his thoughts on the plurality of worlds, maybe life in other worlds. He walked it back the next day, by the way, but he did entertain this. Now, in the early 19th century, is much in discussion. In fact, it so much impressed one young man by the name of Joseph Smith. You heard of him? Founder of the Mormon Church. And he then incorporated this into their theology and in their cosmology. If you understand Mormon cosmology, they very much believe in the plurality of worlds. If you were an exalted Mormon, you and your wife will become gods over other planets someday. So they very much believe in plurality of worlds. Where did he get that idea? Well, he got it in the time period he was living in. And so this idea of life on other planets is not a modern concept, at least in the last few decades of our lifetime. space travel and such, it really goes back several centuries. Now, also another thing in 1947, this was a decade before Sputnik. Sputnik was the first man-made satellite launched by the Soviet Union in 1957, just a decade later. But the space program already was underway. People kind of knew that we were about to enter into space because, well, a few years before this, like 1944, the Germans had perfected the V-2 rocket. It was a ballistic rocket they launched from France, went across the English Channel, and crashed into London and blew up a block at a time when it did. Less known is the fact that this first ballistic missile actually went high enough to be in outer space briefly. It was the first man-made object to go into space. At the conclusion of the war, both the Soviets and the Americans were grabbing all the rocket scientists they could find, the German rocket scientists, confiscating all the V-2 rockets and taking them back to be the backbone, the foundation of their rocket programs, eventually the space program. We took ours to White Sands, New Mexico, and eventually NASA, a decade or so later, came out of that, or the precursor to NASA did. And so, as being a technologically savvy man, I'm sure Mr. Kenneth Arnold was. He was well aware that we were going to enter into the space race soon, and if we were soon to enter space, maybe other alien civilizations, if they existed, had already done so, and they could come see us. So, conclusion I reach is we always do this. We always interpret what we see in terms of what we know. We interpret things differently now because, well, we interpret this phenomenon in terms of what we know or what we think we know in all these things. If you truly believe that we've been visited here on the Earth by flying saucers many, many times, aliens flying saucers, when you see something odd in the sky like I did last weekend, it would be very easy to think, well, that's a flying saucer, and you're done. Well, it didn't look like a flying saucer to me. I've seen plenty of sci-fi movies, didn't look like that. It looked like just something weird in the sky. That's usually why I couldn't identify it. So, question, what are UFOs? I've studied this question off and on for much of my life, more than 40 years. And I am convinced, after all this study, that the vast majority are misidentifications. What kind of things? Well, bright stars and planets. I know the sky pretty well. Some people don't. Most people don't. They see Venus out in the sky for the first time they've ever noticed an incredibly bright star. Whoa, that doesn't belong there. Aircraft can do it. Will-o-wisp, ball lightning, aurora, unusual clouds. It goes on and on and on and on. Mark Loy recently, he works at AIT, sent me a photograph he took of a cloud when he was visiting in Europe on vacation. And this thing looked like a big flying saucer. It really did. It was just a cloud. It really was. It looked convincing at first glance. So weather balloons and others. I actually saw one. It's just really kind of cool what it looked like. So all sorts of things. Some are hoaxes. One of the best, back in the 50s, people would throw a hubcap up in the sky and spin it and take a picture of it. And of course, anybody under the age of about 30 or 40 will say, what's a hubcap? They don't really goes anymore. But they also, one of the most famous were the crop circles. You heard of those? That started up in England 30, 40 years ago. A couple of young men, they took some very sophisticated equipment and would make these flattened down swirling patterns in grain crops, like wheat or barley or rye or something like this. And what was the sophisticated equipment? It was a broad, flat board, a piece of wire, and a cap. That was it. Apparently, I think what they did is they would attach the wire to one end of the board and put the taut end to the other, to a cap. The guy would kneel down. The other guy would just walk in a circle, use like a compass to draw a circle and flatten down the grain. Well, they did this, and it would be like a prominent location, like at a corner of an intersection near a town. And what's that, And people would come up. They were self-professed cereologists. The cereologists studying crop circles, grain circles. And these guys went on the lecture circuit. They wrote books. They'd come out and make measurements. And they certified, yes, this is a bona fide crop circle. It's made by an alien spacecraft hovering or landing last night on this very spot. It couldn't be man-made at all possible. Well, after a few years of this nonsense, it spread around the world. These two guys came forward and they pulled some reporters together, and they went out to a field and proceeded with their sophisticated equipment to make one. Before their very eyes, they hid the equipment, called out some of these cereologists, and they certified, yes, this is a bona fide article. Kind of tore it up right there, didn't it? There have been many other hoaxes. In fact, I thought I was being hoaxed the other night, but I don't think I was. All right. However, a small percentage, 1 or 2%, remain unexplained. All right? But you know what? That doesn't mean they're flying saucers. Just because I haven't been able to explain it yet doesn't mean it's a flying saucer. The thing Saturday night, I don't know what it was. Maybe I'll figure it out eventually, but for right now, I don't know what it was. And I'm not about to go flying saucer. For one thing, it didn't look like one. Another thing, I just don't believe they're out there. But I'm holding back on this one. So let's just take a couple of questions here. Let's just pretend for the time being that flying saucers are real, that ETs have actually come and visited the Earth. Is it okay, just for the sake of argument, to assume that? Let's see where that leads. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to analyze this biblically. All right? And so I'm sure you've all read that chapter in the Bible that's devoted to UFOs and flying saucers, right? You haven't? That's good, because there isn't one. Okay. Okay. I always get worried. Somebody say, yeah, I read that last night. It was really important to me. It's my life first comes from that. Oh, no. No, there isn't one. But you know what? The Bible doesn't directly answer a lot of questions. Like, for instance, last fall, it didn't tell me how I should vote in the election. Well, it was a tough one, you know. So what do you do when you don't have direct, you know, there are certain things that are very clear. Should I rob a bank? Well, no, that's wrong, you know. Those are things that we clearly have commands against. But other things are not so clear. So when you're not clear on something, what do? Well, you study Scripture, hopefully, making it a lifetime study, and you glean some certain characteristics about Scripture, certain things about God, certain things about life, and you can apply those principles then to these things. Now, we want to do that today. We want to apply these principles to what we see here. How we'll get this biblical view of this, and this again relates to how we handle Genesis, because it's a worldview issue and a worldview question. So it all goes back to Genesis in a way, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So let's suppose that for the sake of argument, even though I don't believe it, let's just suppose for the sake of argument, ETs are real, they've come here. Where would the ETs come from? And the obvious answer is they would come from other planets. Duh, that's pretty clear where they come from. Okay, here's a good question for you. If they came from other planets, where did the life on that planet come from? And there are really only two possibilities. One is the possibility that the life evolved there, just developed naturalistically, no God involved. And the other possibility is that God created them. Okay, let's take a look at that very carefully. First of all, take the evolution side for a moment. Did ETs evolve? Well, if you believe that ETs evolved, you probably believe that life developed spontaneously on this planet as well. To me, it's inconceivable that you can believe that God created life on this planet, but when it came to other planets, no, they were kind of on their own. No, I think to be consistent, it's going to be, if life evolved here, life evolved elsewhere. Now, the question is, if life did evolve here, did it evolve elsewhere? Well, there are two answers to that possibility. One could be no. But if life evolved here and nowhere else, then by definition, that makes the Earth unique. And if the Earth is unique in this vast cosmos, then that makes it exceedingly special. And if the Earth is any way special at all, that kind of drags you right back to creation, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So consequently, very few evolutionists believe that life is unique to the Earth. There are a few. But the overwhelming majority of evolutionists believe that life is common in the universe. So they're going to answer the question, yes. And they would argue that life arises wherever the conditions for life are good. So the conclusion is that life, even intelligent life, likely is common enough in the universe, must exist elsewhere. Now, it doesn't mean that life arises out on every planet where the conditions are right. It doesn't mean intelligent life arises, because, well, on some planets, you may not get any farther than clams or cockroaches, right? And cockroaches and clams are not known for building things such as spacecraft, all right? Just one of the issues that they have is they don't have opposable thumbs, making it difficult to grasp anything. You know, but there are other issues too. That's a biggie. That's a biggie. If they evolved opposable thumbs, maybe they could get around to doing that. Let me give you some examples of how this drives science today. One of them is a thing called SETI. Anybody know what SETI stands for? What does it mean?
Search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Very good. Search for extraterrestrial intelligence. That is, intelligence somewhere else in the universe. Now, this presupposes that there's intelligent life on Earth, but the jury is still out on that. But let's let that question go aside for right now. Now, the first SETI experiment was done way back in 1960s. A man named Frank Drake, he was an astronomer, I think at the University of Illinois, or one of those schools over there. And he did an experiment. He said, look, if there's life in the universe, they might We've been broadcasting radio for a few decades, television for a few decades in 1960. So if there's any intelligent life out there within a few dozen light years of the Earth, they could turn their radio telescopes towards the sun. They wouldn't see the Earth, but the Earth is orbiting the sun. And if they tuned their receiver to a very fine channels, they could actually pick up original runs of I Love Lucy on TV. You know, or they could pick up the 1939 War of the Worlds broadcast Orson Welles did in Halloween of 1939. All sorts of things you could pick up. In fact, that was one of the. If you've seen the movie Contact from 20 years ago, it was in there about certain radio broadcasts. Well, you could turn that around. If you're going to have an advanced civilization, you're going to go through a process where you're going to invent radio at some point. So what you can do is you can take radio telescopes on the Earth and point them towards other stellar systems and listen in. And he did that. He found nothing, but it's kind of early on. But that was this has been improved over the years. In fact, now there are 2 projects going, fully funded by private donations, and they run in the background. You got a radio telescope pointed to an object, while the sidebands are actually looking for certain frequencies and measuring, and they've actually generated a tremendous amount of data. I'd say terabytes of data. It was arranged 20 years ago that you could download on your laptop or desktop computer a program where it would take this information and sort through it. Most of the time, when you're looking at cat videos and sending email and such, your CPUs are just sitting there doing nothing. So this could run in the background. You could do some real science, quote unquote, by doing that on your computer, and hopefully find some stuff. By the way, how much out of the terabytes of data we probably have, how many intelligent signals have they found so far? 0. All right. Now, over the years, we've sent various probes to Mars. It started back in 1965. I was in grade school. That summer, I was getting my weekly reader during the summer months, and they had an article on this. I could go outside and I could see Mars. First planet I actually identified in the sky, a little red star, and they told all about this Mariner 4, I think it was, that went past Mars and took photographs. They were really surprised because they were expecting an Earth-like world. They found a lunar-like world with lots of craters. Over the years, we've sent numerous spacecraft. And one of the big things they want to look for each time, the boilerplate, is let's look for life on Mars, or evidence that life once existed on Mars. I am so tired of that boilerplate. I love Mars. There are good reasons to go to Mars besides all of that. How much evidence have they found for life on Mars? 0. So I think it's pretty clear there's no life on Mars. I don't think there's ever been any life on Mars. We can retire that boilerplate, but I don't think they will, because hope springs eternal in the hearts of evolutionists, don't they? Okay, they want to look for liquid water. That's the gold standard, because would you agree liquid water is essential for life? Oh yeah, your body's like 3/4 life water by mass. It's an incredible substance that life seems to need. It's a universal solvent, does all sorts of cool things for us. Do you realize that water is the most abundant molecule in the universe? We see it all over the place. We even see it in the atmospheres of cool stars. We see it between the stars. We see it on planets and comets and all sorts, just everywhere. But we have never observed it in any other form other than gas or solid, except on the Earth. The only place we know for certain that liquid water exists is here on Earth. There are some indirect evidences, indirect, not direct observation, of maybe some of the planets, the outer planets, their satellites, some of them might have liquid water deep beneath their surfaces, but that is not entirely certain. As far as we know, only liquid water exists here. So they keep looking for water, because if they find water, maybe life would exist. You know, they look for life on other planets, on stars orbiting other planets. They're looking for Earth-like planets where water might exist. We don't know for certain. Here's another one for you. The search for extrasolar planets I just mentioned. We now know of nearly 4,000 planets orbiting other stars. That's a lot of planets. Why are they looking for them? Well, they want to find Earth-like planets. How many Earth-like planets have they found? 0. They claim a few, but it just takes me 5 or 10 minutes on the internet to come up with several reasons why each one can't be, and I had to talk about that I gave the other day. Then there's this thing called astrobiology. Astrobiology is defined to be the study of life elsewhere in the universe. There are 2 journals concerning this. One's simply called Astrobiology, and that one's called the Journal of Astrobiology. The other just called Astrobiology. One's been around for more than a dozen years, one for more than 15 years, I think. One's a semi-monthly, bi-monthly, and the other one's a quarterly. And they're just each issue just jam-packed with articles on astrobiology. You know, you can get a college degree all the way up to a PhD in astrobiology. Many times it's a joint project between astronomy and a biology department. There are conferences every year with grad students and scientists meeting on astrobiology. I go to meetings, the semi-annual meetings of the American Astronomical Society sometimes, and they have sections, many times multiple sections, on astrobiology. I can't help myself. I have to go to these. They're a hoot. All right. So you got people who have bona fide experts. They have their PhDs in astrobiology. They're professors of astrobiology. They publish on astrobiology. What was the definition of astrobiology again? The study of life elsewhere in the universe. How much life have we found elsewhere in the universe? Zero. So apparently, astrobiology is the one science for which there is no data. And they think we creationists are weird. I'm just saying. All right. So that's how it drives science today, all these kind of things. 5 different examples. Now, that's what the world thinks. They think the evolutionists think there must be life all over the place. They're trying to prove it. They haven't been able to prove it yet. All right? And I think there's a reason why they haven't been able to prove that. What about the possibility that God created ETs? Well, that's the other possibility here, and I have several responses to that. One would be that, well, God's attention appears to be centered on mankind. If you read the Bible, the earth and mankind were not necessarily geographically the center, or physically the center of the universe, but we're certainly the center of God's attention. That's kind of a weak argument, because, you know, God's infinite. Maybe He could center His attention on a lot of different creatures out there. Well, let's take this a little further. If ETs exist, they may not be exactly like us, but having 5 fingers, digits on each extremity. Maybe they have 6. Maybe they're shaped a little differently. Maybe their noses are on the back of their heads or something. I don't know. They got really weird things about them. But if they're really, truly like us in some respect, they're going to have to possess souls and spirits like we do as well. They've got an eternal destiny there. And what would that eternal destiny be? That is, are they in need of salvation? Are they fallen creatures that are under the penalty of death, of sin? And will they need salvation to restore their proper relationship with their Creator? Well, if so, then why? Was it for Adam's sin? Adam's transgression? Well, that's the reason why we need salvation. We didn't personally sin in the garden, but our federal head Adam did, and so that brought death and sin and death by sin into the world, for which we need salvation to restore that relationship and to live forever. But keep something in mind. To the aliens, we're the aliens. And so Adam was an alien. And so if you were a believer on one of these alien worlds and you wanted to share the gospel, wouldn't your gospel begin something like this? A long time ago, in a galaxy far away. Well, I think you see that isn't going to fly, is it? Well, maybe it wasn't because of Adam's sin. Maybe it's because of sin introduced individually on each planet. Maybe it was an Adam-like creature on each of these planets. Well, that's possible. But the question then arises, did Jesus then have to atone for their sins? When Jesus came to this world, He came to atone for Adam's race, did He not? He didn't die for an alien race, didn't rise from the dead for an alien race. So if there was a sin introduced in each individual world, then Jesus, when He left this world, had to go to another world where He was born a virgin, lived a perfect life, laid down His life, atoned for sins, rose from the dead, ascended to go to another planet to do it again, and again, and again, and again. Well, folks, that's not what the New Testament says about Jesus' mission. When Jesus left this world, where did He go? To another alien world to do it again? No, He went to heaven to sit at the right hand of the Father. You think, I literally believe Jesus Christ died once for all. So if they're alien creatures like us, they could not have sinned. It couldn't be because of Adam's sin that they're sinners. It can't be for sin introduced on their individual worlds. Well, maybe they never fell at all in the first place. Maybe they're sinless creatures. That's a possibility, but you know what? Romans 8 speaks of the whole creation requiring, whole creation groaning under the burden, under the taint of man's sin. And in fact, I believe that's the reason why there must be a new heavens and a new earth. And some of the entire creation must be restored. It's talked about in Isaiah, 2 Peter chapter 3, and Revelation as well. Also talks about a new heaven and a new earth. Because I firmly believe the entire creation has been tainted by man's sin, and it must be redeemed from that. And if that's the case, then we have alien beings who never fell into sin, but are living in a sin-tainted world. And that raises a raft of logical and theological problems. So if it's not for the sin that Adam committed, if it wasn't for the sin on their alien world, it wasn't for them being sinless in the world today, I think we've exhausted all the possibilities. And so consequently, there cannot be any other beings like us out there. So I think we are alone. Let me take a sidestep very briefly. I mentioned Frank Drake did the first SETI experiment back in 1960. He wasn't done. The next year, he published his famous Drake equation to try to quantify how many alien civilizations there might be that he could communicate with. Now, we could modify that ever so slightly to find out just how many alien civilizations there might be. Forget communication, just how many would there be out there. And his equation is this. It's n is equal to the product of 7 numbers. I'll go through these very quickly. The number n is the number of civilizations in our galaxy. He said that communication might be possible. I'll just simply say beings like us, civilization like ours. Well, the first number on the right, r, is the average number of stars formed per year in the galaxy. The next number, f sub p, is the fraction of stars that have planets. That's a fraction. It's going to be between 0 and 1. The other numbers might be numbers. N sub e is the average number of planets that could support life per star. Now, I suspect that's also a fraction between 0 and 1, but I don't know for sure. It might be a number that's greater than 1. Then you have the next number, f sub L, which is a fraction of planets that can support life on which life actually develops. That's f sub L. And again, that's saying, hedging your bets, on some planets life won't evolve at all, even though the conditions are right. Then there's f sub I, fraction of planets in which life goes on to develop intelligent life. That's cockroaches and clams again. Keep in mind that after 3.5 billion years of evolution on Earth, supposedly, life finally reached intelligence. It took 3.5 billion years. Some plants may never get there, according to evolutionary thinking. F sub C is a fraction of civilizations that develop technology, radio that can detect, or space travel. Take your pick. That's how we could modify it right here so it would work. And then finally, L is the length of time for which such civilizations would exist. In this case, release detectable radio signals. Back in the 60s, they were worried about nuclear annihilation. Now we're worried about climate change. It's always one thing or another. We're going to destroy ourselves, so there's a finite length of time involved. Okay. We need to talk about evaluating these terms. How many of these terms did Frank Drake know? He didn't know any of them. So what do you do when you have an equation, you don't know any of the inputs? Well, if you did this, you would be making it up. But if you're a scientist like me and have a PhD behind your name, you don't make it up, you estimate things. You got the difference? It's the same thing, but we call it, I estimate, you make it up, all right? And these estimates vary widely. An evolutionist is going to highball them. They're going to be very optimistic. I don't believe in life elsewhere. I'm going to lowball. Like, for instance, I firmly believe in the law of biogenesis. So I believe that one of those terms is equal to 0. It has to be. That's where life does not spontaneously rise. So the estimates are all over the place. They have their rosy ones. I have my pessimistic ones. Now, I said he didn't know any of them, but since then we've had a little bit of input on this. We now have information coming from extrasolar planets. We have some information on F sub P and N sub E. Now the fact we have any extrasolar planets, we know that F sub P is actually not equal to 0. We didn't know that before. For the first time, we know that one of the terms of the 7 is not equal to 0. But keep something in mind. If any one of the 7 terms is equal to 0, it doesn't matter what the other 6 are. No, because whenever you multiply by 0, the whole thing is 0. It doesn't matter what the other multipliers are. So if I can just demonstrate that one term is 0, then the rest are 0. So we can evaluate these terms. Now, as I prepared this, we've got like 3,500 known extrasolar planets. I'm going to lowball. It's a little higher than that, not to 4,000. Let's just keep it at 3,500. This will help us evaluate F sub P. It's pretty clear that F sub P is not equal to 0. However, it's my opinion none of these are conducive for life. A good reason for that. Very few are even a hint of possibility, and the ones that are a hint of possibility have grave problems with them, as I did in another presentation during this conference. So, if none are conducive for life, we could throw the Earth in the mix. We end up with 0.0003, which is a pretty small number, but it's not equal to 0. The other numbers might be very large, so therefore you could have millions of civilizations. But you know what? We probably ought to exclude the Earth because we already knew the Earth is here. The question is not, does the Earth exist? The question is, do any other planets like the Earth with civilizations exist? So we throw that out, we eliminate it as a control, and when you do that, you end up with n is equal to 0. So, to answer the question, are we alone? I think the answer is scientifically yes. People say, wait a minute, someone may say. The data are not all in. Agreed, the data are not all in. But question, when are the data ever always in? All in? And they never are. You know, you always could get more data. That's just a given. Data can always, we can find more data. But that doesn't paralyze us and keep us from reaching a conclusion. We've got nearly 4,000 data points. That's a lot of data. It's about time, way past time, we reach a conclusion. Well, we might find out next week or next month or next year that we actually do have an Earth-like planet. Well, that's fine. Come back next week, next month, or next year, and we'll talk about it. But right now, you can't reach a conclusion based on the data you might have later, or tomorrow, or next week, or next year, or a decade from now. You only make conclusions on what you have now. And by the way, it's the nature of science to change your conclusion. They change all the time. So why the paralysis? Why don't people want to make this conclusion that's firmly based upon the data we have in hand? Well, they don't want to. It disagrees with their worldview. That's it. They're coming at this with extreme bias in all of this. You've probably never heard a scientist say this, have you? You just do it now. Okay, as a scientist, I say, scientifically, I have good data to support the contention we are alone in the universe. By the way, I've already argued biblically we are as well. Don't you love it when the science agrees with the Bible? Again, it's the science agreeing with the Bible, not the other way around. Because the Bible is authoritative and science, well, it changes too much. Now, does this preclude the possibility of animal life, plant life, microorganisms? Well, no, I did all of this on the basis of intelligent life like us. So you could have planets out there, I guess, that would have, moss, bacteria and such that wouldn't do anything. But I would take a swipe at it this way. A couple of things. We do have dominion. Psalm 8 tells us that. Genesis 2, I think, 1 and 2 tell us that. We have dominion over the world. And so if you have, all sorts of creatures, a planet like the Earth with all sorts of organisms like on the Earth, except man isn't there, you've got nobody in charge. That's not good. Plus, that's not the way God operates, I don't believe. And also we have purpose. The animals and plants around us serve us well. They give us purpose. We're to have that dominion mandate to be stewards and take care of things. But they are here for our benefit. It does no good to seal up trees so we'll never cut them down because they're useful products. And animals, not being able to use them. I am, however, a firm supporter of PETA. People eating tasty animals, particularly when it comes to pigs. I love pigs. I love them to death, quite literally. So they're here for our benefit and our use, not to abuse them. We need to be proper in the way we handle things. Be kind to these animals and the plants around us, and replant them. I was into recycling long before recycling. I've been doing recycling my entire life. Long before everybody else. Back in the 60s, use once and throw away. It made no sense to me. I always would recycle stuff even back then. Question, are plants alive biblically? Well, they are scientifically, perhaps. Biblically, they're not. There's a requirement given in the book of Leviticus for life. What is it? The life is
in the blood.
In the blood. Do plants have blood? Do microorganisms have blood? No, I think there are a lot of things we think of scientifically as being alive that really aren't biblically. So just a little food for thought. Okay, to wrap this up, there is a spiritual component to this. Some people try to argue that the whole thing is spiritual. They point out that according to 2 Corinthians, Satan sometimes appears as an angel of light, and so consequently many of the UFO sightings that are seen are lights in the skies, and so therefore these UFO sightings are demonic activity. That's real sloppy reasoning there. Real sloppy reasoning. There's a little bit more to it than that. And furthermore, I've already indicated that the vast majority of UFO sightings can be explained. Misidentifications, pranks, all these sorts of things, leaving only a few percent to be explained. I've read a number of books out there that purport this idea. They tie this demonic activity into certain versions of eschatology, future events, the end of the world, and this sort of stuff. They try to make an occult connection to it and all this sort of stuff. But I think this is a fantastic explanation. It really is. And many of these books gloss over the many reports of UFOs. They just automatically assume the UFO sightings are credible and they're true and they need explanation beyond natural phenomenon or man-made things that we can explain. And I just think we need to be more circumspect in that. If we had a huge body of stuff that really was very clear, yet couldn't be explained any other way, perhaps, but you need to spend most of the time debunking many of the claims before you go on to these fantastic claims. However, having said that, I'm not a big fan of this demonic explanation of, the demons flying UFOs sort of thing. However, I do believe there's a much more subtle and much more insidious thing going on here. You'll find that the vast majority of people who believe, probably nearly everybody who believes in UFOs, or who believe in flying saucers and aliens coming to the Earth, they believe in evolution as well. The idea is, getting back to earlier arguments I made here, if these things are out there, they probably evolved out there, and so this is proof that evolution is true. And the vast majority of people who believe in these flying saucer encounters are evolutionists, and this reinforces a belief in evolution. And you see, if evolution is true, and the aliens are manifestations of evolution elsewhere in the universe, then evolution is true, then creation is not. And if creation is not true, then there isn't a creator. And if there is no creator, then there is no sin. And if there is no sin, then there is no need for salvation. And if there is no need for salvation, I haven't a clue what Jesus Christ was doing 2,000 years ago in this world. It's as simple as that. Evolution is true, then Christianity and the Bible are not true. And that, again, brings us back, is Genesis history. And the whole emphasis of this conference has been an emphatic yes. So it does, ETs and UFOs tie into this. And because of this reinforcement of evolution, the true demonic thing there, it deflects attention from the true and living God. And if you want to look for a demonic connection, I believe that is it. One final word. I started off talking about science fiction, and you may think, well, the takeaway is that Danny Faulkner hates science fiction. It's a sin to get involved in this stuff. I never said anything like that, okay? One thing you have to remember about science fiction is what? What is it? It's fiction! Yes, it's a story. It's make-believe. And good fiction ought to have a point. You know, sometimes it's just escapism, particularly if it's a movie, but good fiction should have a point in it. And good fiction always, what's the author saying here? And, you know, science fiction movies and TV shows like Star Trek, you know, the show goes off, turn the set off, turn to your family and say, okay, what was the writer saying here? What are they trying to get across? What message? Many times I can't figure it out myself either, but there's usually a message pretty clearly in these things, what they're talking about. It's a good starting point for discussion and worldview discussion, because there's a worldview in a lot of all this. And so if you have a problem with science fiction, confusing it with reality and such, and maybe it's just too big in your life, maybe you need to leave it alone. But if you can control it and contain it and understand what it is and keep it in bounds, then fine. I enjoy a good science fiction yard. There's a lot of bad science fiction, though, that's really not very well done. I like good science fiction, so I'm very picky. I've also written a couple of, I'm in the process of writing a couple of science fiction stories dealing with creation, evolution, with salvation, Christianity. It would be great if we had a whole genre of Christian science fiction. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? And we can do aliens. My stories aren't about aliens, but we can incorporate aliens at some point. So enjoy your science fiction. It's fine. Just remember that there's fiction here.